Hello, my name is Hugo Guerra. Welcome to this tutorial for Hiero for the Foundry. This tutorial is called Introduction to Conform Workflow. During this tutorial, I'll be showing you some of the workflows done inside of Hiero to conform several shots for compositing inside of NUKE. We will go through the steps of loading in an EDL from editorial, of shot managing all of our shots and organizing our tracks and assets, and concluding on rendering and exporting all the clips into scripts and plates for us to use inside of NUKE. The project that we'll be using inside this tutorial is a TV commercial for Grolsch. I would like to thank BMB Stink, the mill, for kindly letting us use the Grolsch TV commercial on this tutorial. So let's start by looking at the TV spot that we will be working inside of Hiero.
Herman Winterkilt, the most prolific football coach in the Netherlands, doesn't speak. If you saw him in half, you'd see the history of Dutch football that rings on his soul. He can inspire greatness with merely the stroke of an invisible mustache. Character speaks louder than words. Big Bold Grolsch.
So this is going to be the TV commercial that we are going to use for this project today. Big Bold Grolsch was a campaign that we did at the mill, and it's one of 5 different TV commercials that we created for Grolsch beer. We are going to start by conforming one of them, a 40-second edit called Herman. So let's start by opening Hiero, and like anything, I always would suggest by starting by saving. So I'm going to start by save my project, and I already have a directory for this project. So I'm going to save my project with the same naming convention that we use at the mill. So I'm going to save as Grolsch Herman version 3. Let's save it. So now it's saved, I can start working. Also, usually we create a folder structure for the project in hand. Usually it deals with an offline folder, with EDL folder, a grade folder, etc. So of course this is not set in stone. Anyone can do the structure that they need, and of course each company will have a different one. But let's start by doing the basics, which would be, I would always have one folder for the EDLs. I would always also have one folder for my offlines. And of course a bin folder, which has everything else, including the footage of this project. Of course, if you use a bit of Python, you can always create a small pipeline Python tool that creates this structure every time you start a new project. So let's start by bringing in our first EDL. Now, usually, if you worked with any other facility that provides you external EDLs, you probably know that quite often you get several EDLs for your project. So basically you can have a choice of bringing in an XML or bringing in an EDL. An XML, of course, will have the advantage that it will bring all the tracks of your edit as in one go. The EDL, of course, if you have multiple tracks on your edit, you'll have to bring them one at a time. Let's start by bringing the first EDL, which is the actual cut, the 40-second edit of this project. So I'm going to select the Herman Cut 22. So this means it's the 22 version of the 40-second of the Herman TV spot. I'm going to press open. The first option that it will give me is that it is going to ask me what kind of video frame rate we are using on this project. I know for a fact that this is 25 frames per second. Actually, I even know that this was shot on an Alexa camera at 25 frames per second. It's always very important that you have all the information from editorial or from the camera so that you know what video frame rate is occurring on this project. I'm going to press OK. And once I press OK, sorry, I'm just going to bring back to my work space. Once I press OK, as you can see, now I have an EDL which is 1000 frames long. It starts at 10 from the editorial. It's full HD, and it's basically one track with all the cuts from the Erman edit. As you can see, everything is offline, and this is always the case because the first time that you load up the footage, it won't, because the edit usually comes from another place, from another facility, it won't know where the footage is. So as you can see, this is our cut, and we have, as you can see also, all the shots have their original real names from the camera. But we're going to go into this a bit later. So once we have our cut, I am now going to right click and bring the rest of the edits. So I'm going to right click, and instead of having to bring EDL by EDL, you do have an option in Hiero to import multiple tracks at once. And that's what you can do. Once you import the first one, or the master EDL, usually being EDL V1, which is the track 1, you can then import the other ones. And this is very easily done by right-clicking over your edit, and you go into the option called Import Track. Import Track will give you the ability to import the rest of the tracks that you have missing on your edit. So I'm going to go ahead and select using the command button to basically select the rest of the tracks that were left behind, except the one that we already have. I don't need that one because it's already on the timeline. I'm going to select all 4 of them, and I'm going to press open. Again, it's going to ask me about the video frame rate. We still maintain the same video frame rate even for the other tracks. And I'm going to press OK. Once I've pressed OK, as you can see, now I have all my tracks for this edit just like the editor as prepared. Now, so you know that there is one very important step that has to happen before you venture to do a conform in Hiero. It's always very, very good for you to have a good communication with your editor so that he can correctly name all the tracks and actually organize and clean up the EDL before you start processing inside of Hiero. As often, if an editor is professional, he will always give you a clean EDL with the correct tracks for all the effects. But of course, as we all know, that's not always the case. Sometimes we do not get a full clean EDL. The only thing I'm going to do change here is that I know for a fact that this track here is actually on the lower section. I mean, just for an organizational point of view, I'm going to maintain my edit on the video track 1, and I'm going to select my track on the top and drag it to the bottom so that it lives on the bottom area. And then I'm going to drag these 3 clips, which are the multiple grades, which you will see in a minute. I'm also going to drag them down so that we have them exactly like it was on the edit. And now this is really it. We now have the full edit, all the tracks, but of course the only thing remaining is to actually reconnect to the media, which we can do by going into our EDL. As you can see, in here we have a table of content of our EDL. Basically, this is a place which I'm going to actually put in full screen so you can see. This is where you can see all of your, it tells you what kind of speed you had on your shots, where did they came from, the source in, the source out, the basic source frame range, and also the time code. Even gives you the original clip name from the camera. All the information you need for actually to link and to know where the clips are. Once I'm done with this, I am now going to click Match Media. Once I click Match Media, I am going to basically point Hiero into where all my footage. I'm going to link to where the media is, and I'm going to press OK, open. Basically, it opens up a new option window called the Conform options. The Conform options give you basically what the rules of the conforming are. This meaning if you want to conform by the name, by the reel, by the folder, by any type of relevant rule for the conform to happen. You can also accept just the time code if you don't want any rule to match. And if the shot was conformed already, you could also say that you want to reconform it by using the last option, conform shots that already have media. I'm going to press, and I'm going to leave everything by default, and I'm going to press OK. It should only take a few seconds to load up every reel into your timeline. And there you go. Now we have all the clips on our timeline ready to go for edit. The only clips that didn't got found were the basic steam plates that we have as extra for the effects on this shot. So I'm going to click the Match Media button again, and actually those steam plates are not on the same place as the footage. So I'm going to go through the folder where they are, which actually is just here. So I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to wait for it to find the plates that are missing. And there you go. It found the remaining 4 clips that we were missing. Now, one of the things that I will have to change, because as you can see when you look at these plates, the color space is wrong. This is because the graded plates were done in Rec 709 and not log. So I'm going to select the graded plates, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say that these plates are in Set Media Color Transfer. They actually are Rec 709, not log. Also, the plates of Steam, I am also going to right click and change the color space to Rec 709 because they are also Rec 709. And there you go. Now you have the edit. The only problem now that you still have to face is that because of the nature of this project, because the compositing is being done to the graded plates, but we did start the project before the grade, very often it's very common to have the plates first ungraded, and then you basically later on the project replace the plates by the graded ones, just so that you can continue to comp. As you can see, all the footage that you have here is ungraded. So let's start with that first step, with the ungraded plates. And then a bit later on the tutorial, I'll show you a very simple way of just swapping to the graded plates so that you can start working from the graded ones instead of the actual flat ones. One thing I am going to do, because apparently that might be an error from this edit, because as you can see we have 2 tracks with the exact same footage. I'm going to delete one of them because we do not need 2 of them. Most likely, and again like I said, on editorial the EDL should always be a bit clean by the editor. But very often you know that you always have extra tracks and tracks that are not important for the work that you're trying to do. Now that we have all the DPXs and all the footage, the log footage from this TV commercial, I'm going to bring in the actual footage, the actual offline, so that we can have a reference of how the actual commercial. And of course, again, Hiero has a very specific place for the offlines to appear. One of the things I'm going to ask you is to go into the offline folder that we created before, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to import my offline into my project. I already have an offline here ready for us to use, and basically it's the original offline from the Final Cut edit. This offline, of course, has sound, and it also has non-graded plates, but it does have the final rack in the footage, as you can see. One very cool feature that Hiero now has, because as you can see now, I have no idea to actually know where the limitations of my screen is that now you actually can turn on the format barrier so that you actually know where the footage ends. And this is done by this little icon on the upper corner on the right side. If you click, these are the viewer settings. In the viewer settings, now we have options to have title safe, action safe, and format. The ones I'm going to use is format. As soon as I put format, as you can see, now I know exactly where my 16:9 footage ends, and now I know how much they've racked the footage on the offline. I also, of course, have options to have title save. I also can have action save. I can have both of them, and this is, of course, very handy for the work that we do. We can also put a mask, both 16:9, 4:3, 1 to 66, and 2 to 45, and 1 to 85. We'll go back into this in a minute. I'm gonna bring back my viewer from full screen. And now that we have our timeline and we brought in our offline, it's very simple to line up the offline to your edit. You basically just have to select your offline and drag the offline into the Set Reference Media button on your edit. Once you click on that, after a few seconds, you'll see that your offline is now created on a new track called Reference. And as you can see, if I basically look at the offline and the online, you can see that they match perfectly, of course, with the only difference being the rack and a few zoom-ins in the image here and there. Now, also, as you can see, our edit is actually constructed by multiple resolutions. As you can see, the source footage is running in Full HD. Our offline is running at 640 by 360. And then our smoke plates that we are going to use in this commercial are actually not either HD or SD. They have a format of 2300 by 720. Now, if you do want to scale your footage or to basically downscale it to the actual output resolution, which is Full HD, Hiero now has that facility. So the fastest way to do that is to basically select the clip that you want to change the resolution and go into the Format tab. Inside the Format tab, you have a choice of bringing it to Format, to Scale, and or basically disabling it so that it actually stays on the same exact resolution. So for example, if I put to Format, it scales up. If I put to Scale, I can basically scale up and down my footage. I also have the options to flip the footage, to flop the footage, and to turn it as well. And of course, the typical resize type, like just any other application. I'll show you what the copy cuts is. The copied cuts is basically the ability to transfer a specific cut from one track to another track. So for example, let's imagine that we want to take the reference media with us to NUKE, so that we want also the reference media to be cut shot by shot, just like the rest of the footage. This is very easily done. Instead of you having to go frame by frame, cutting the sequence part by part, you can right click on the lower part of your menu. You'll have an option called Copy Cuts. If I click on Copy Cuts, you'll see that a new menu opens up. This menu is the way for you to copy a determined edit to another edit. So for example, we can select all the cuts, or the selected cuts in this case. I want all the cuts. And you can see that we have a from and a to. So let's say that we want from the V1, which is this layer with all the clips, all the shots, and I want the cutting to happen to the reference track, which is the offline. Once I'm happy with this, I'm going to press OK, and as you can see, now the offline has exactly the same cuts as the upper track layer, which means it saves you quite a lot of time without having to cut the edit shot by shot. Once we have our offline, once we have all our plates, now comes the time where Hiero really shines. Once you have all your shots, the conforming tools in Hiero, if you use the template structure correctly, can really save you a lot of times. One of the biggest problems we have these days in visual effects facilities is the time that it takes for an operator to basically export, name, and correctly organize all the plates for all the visual effects artists on a production. And this becomes even worse when you have multiple edits, like on this production. We have a 40-second, a 30-second, a 20-second, a 10-second. All of these edits share the same clips, sometimes cut downs, sometimes longer. It's extremely difficult to organize a project when you have to do it by hand. One of also the problems is that when you have to do it by hand, human error can become a factor as well. And that's really where Hiero really becomes a very powerful tool with its template-based and Python-based exporting capabilities. Before we even go into the templates and before we even export something, we still do need to organize this a little better. So regarding tracks, we already know that because for each track I will have a certain type of plate for my visual effects artist to work on. The same way I have a perfect reference where the offline is inside the reference folder, I'm also going to name all my tracks to the corresponding effect for each of these tracks. So the first one, I'm going to keep the V1, but I'm going to call log so that I know the plate is log. And I'm going to say it's edit 22. So this is log edit 22 because this is version 22 from the editor. Then the second track is V2, and I'm actually going to call it rec 709 because it's graded. I also need to say that it's graded. I'm going to say that's the grade 709, and those are extra plates. These are actually the sign plates. So these three shots down here are extra shots for us to use on the comp for grading the Grolsch sign. Then up here I have two more tracks which basically have effects on it. So I'm going to call the first one Steam Effect V4, and I'm going to copy the same name for the V3. So now I have all my tracks organized. I'm going to show you. So as you can see, on Steam V1 and V2, we basically have the steam plates that we're going to use. Because on these shots, we are supposed to make a fake steam coming out of the mouth of the trainer. We have 4 of these clips here. Then, if you look at the lower section, we have the actual flat plates, and then below it you have the offline reference. Now, on the last 3 sequences, as you can see, we have 3 graded plates with the actual Grolsch logo. And this is because the client has locked the look and the color palette for the logo of Grolsch. And that's why we are having an extra track and an extra plate just for these logos. And this, as you can see, is why we have that track. Because, as you can see, we have the original plate and we have the client-approved palette for the color for the Grolsch logo. So, once we have all of this ready to go, we now just need to start naming our shots, because no NUKE compositor will want to comp shots called A004, A006, A001. So let's basically use also some of the capabilities of Hiero to actually rename all the shots. So I'm going to select all of my V1, I'm going to right click, and up here I have an option called Rename Shots. The Rename Shots is the ability for you to rename the shots in one go. If I click Rename Shots, as you can see, I can do sequential rename, find and replace, simple rename, match sequence, or clip name. The only thing you need to do is to give them a pattern. So let's say that your facility has a specific naming convention that says shot 1, shot 2, or maybe like the mill, it's instead of shot, it's SH, 3 hashes. So the only thing you need to do is to give whatever pattern of the naming convention you want, and then just keep the hashes for the amount of numbers you want for each shot. Also, it's important to start at 1 and do increments of 1, because we are starting at shot 1 and we want all of it to be shot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. I am not going to do the audio because I don't need to, and I'm going to press click to rename. And as you can see now, all of my shots are named shot 1, shot 2, shot 3, shot 4. But they still retain inside its metadata the original real name, so that you can still backtrack that clip into your edit. I'm going to do the same with the offline. So I'm going to select all the offline, right click, and again rename shots, sequential 1 to increment of 1, and I'm going to rename all my shots. Now I have my offline with that renaming as well. And then, as you can see, the 3 layers here on the top with the logo grade, I can basically select all 3 and right click and again make rename shots. But this time, because the first one is shot 14, I'm going to say that my starting point is shot 14, but I still have an increment of 1. Then I'm going to click rename, and now you can see shot 14, 15, and 16. Last but not least is my steam plates. Now my steam plates, as you can see, are for shot 5 and 6. So I'm going to rename the shots starting at 5, and then I'm going to rename the top ones, rename it starting at 5. And there you go. Now you have your entire project completely organized by shot to 1 to 17. The reason for me to rename the shots and also to rename the tracks is that because we are going to create a template for exporting this production based on tracks. So that this means that inside your live action folder for each of the shots, you'll have one specific folder for each of the tracks of this production. Meaning that you'll get one folder for shot 5 steam, one folder for grade shot 14, one folder for log 1, log 2.